Alright, so today we're going to do 5.5 proving triangles by SSS and right triangle congruence. So SSS, this stands for side, side, side. So if three sides of one triangle are congruent to three sides of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So in our example, we have triangle ABC and triangle DEF. And so we know that if the side length AB is congruent to DE and BC is congruent to EF and AC is congruent to DF, then the triangles are congruent. So triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Alright, so now let's try some proofs. So let's first take everything that we're given and mark that on our triangles to the right. So we're given that PQ is congruent to ST, so I'm going to mark that. And then we also know that QR is congruent to TR. And R is out. So those two side lengths are congruent. And this last one says that R is the midpoint of PS. So if R is the midpoint, then we know that those two side lengths are congruent as well, because that's what the midpoint is, right? And so for our reasonings, PQ is congruent to ST. Our reason is that it's given to us, and QR is congruent to TR, also given, and then R is the midpoint of PS, given, again. And so because R is the midpoint of PS, we have that PR is congruent to SR. So this is the definition of a midpoint. So this is the definition of a midpoint. PR is congruent to SR. And so because all of our sides are congruent here, and we've shown that, then the two triangles are congruent as well because of the SSS congruence theorem. So side, side, side. And so what I want you to do is go ahead and try and start this next one on your own. And so pause the video, mark it on your triangle that you've written down on your piece of paper, and see if you can come up with your proof. Alright, so hopefully you pause the video and you try this one on your own. So JL is congruent to NM, and so I'm going to mark that on my triangle here. So JL and MM, those are congruent, and K is the midpoint of JN and LM. And so all of those are congruent here. Okay? And so now we kind of already know that these two triangles are congruent because all of their sides are congruent, but we need to prove it. So JL is congruent to MNM. This is given to us. And I'm going to change my pen color here. I don't know why it likes red so much. I don't. So those are both given to us. And then JK is equal or congruent to NK. This is the definition of a midpoint. And then LK is congruent to MK, again, definition of midpoint. And so because K is the midpoint and all of those sides are congruent, we know that those two triangles are congruent because of the side, side, side congruence theorem. All right, so this next one is kind of tough, so we're going to go through it together. So we're given that AC is congruent to AD and that CB is congruent to DB. Okay, and then we also know that that side is the same in both triangles, so it's obviously the same. It's obviously congruent. Okay, so we're going to start with our given statements. So AC is congruent to AD. That's because it's given to us. CB is congruent to DB. Again, given. And then let's start with AB is congruent to BA, because the last side that we need is just that side in the middle. And so since AB is congruent to BA, because of the reflexive property, then we know that the two triangles are congruent because of side, side, side congruence. Alright, so now let's talk about hypotenuse, leg. So if the hypotenuse and a leg of one right triangle is congruent to the hypotenuse and a leg of another right triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So we're given triangle ABC and DEF. They're both right triangles here. And so if BC is congruent to EF, they're both the hypotenuse there. those are congruent, and AB is congruent to DE, the legs on both of the triangles, then we know that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. All right, so let's try this proof. So again, on my triangle, I'm just going to mark down kind of what we have going on. So we have that triangle LMP and MNP are right triangles. And we know that because of the little box in the corner. That tells us that it's 90 degrees, so it's a right triangle. And so because of that, then the other angle on the other side is also 90 degrees. And so we don't necessarily need to mark this down. We just kind of know that. And then we also are given ML is congruent to MN. And those are our hypotenuse. Okay, and so the only other thing that we're looking for is that leg there. And we know that since they share that side right there, that is a congruent length there. And so let's start our proof. So we have the triangle LMP and MNP are right triangles. We know that because it's given to us. And ML is congruent to MN, also given. And then we know that MP is congruent to MP, again, because of the reflexive property. And so because we have the hypotenuse and the leg are all congruent for both triangles, then we know that the two triangles are congruent because of the HL congruence theorem.